Welcome to Artpop Talk. I'm Bianca.
And I'm Gianna.
What's up, Gianna?
I'm just LOLing at my setup today as I have my microphone on an ironing board and I sit on a bolster. So
Cool. I love that home studio journey for you.
thank you. It's very professional.
Are you using your new mic?
I am using my new mic.
Oh my gosh. Cute.
Yeah, I would feel a lot cuter if my setting was a lot cuter, but you know.
We'll get there. I thoroughly see the professional studio plan in our 5-year goal.
Agreed.
Totally.
What are you up to?
Oh, just hanging out. It's very cold, Gianna. I wore a flannel this weekend.
Have we reached the depths of winter?
The depths of winter. Almost. I wore a skirt out this weekend, and I will say I was very chilly at some points.
It is starting to get a little bit colder here, I must say. We're at that point where it's just really like chilling in the morning, but I don't handle the cold well, so I will wear a sweater just for the 5-minute walk from my car to work. And
Right.
then I'll be hot the rest of the day, but then it will be cold
Right.
again in the afternoon. But of course I'm going to wear a sweater because the only time I'm outside is that 5-minute walk from my car
Right.
to the office.
No, this weekend, I had such a cute outfit, and I knew I was going to be cold at night, and I wore the skirt anyway, but it was lovely during the day. I'll say that.
I do love winter fashion, though, I must say. I don't handle the cold well, but I love me some winter fashion.
I guess. It's not that I don't like it. I love the aesthetic of it. It's so much work, I'm perfectly fine myself just like putting on a nice summer dress and wearing one piece of clothing and no pants. But I love looking at winter fashion. It's beautiful. It's just, it causes me too much stress, and I hate bundling. That's some shit. You know what? I hate, because then, I love a good cute coat, but a good cute coat is not always going to keep you the warmest. You know what I mean? So it's function and fashion sometimes in winter, I feel like, are very hard to work together.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, because I love a good long coat, but it's like, damn, let's be real, this coat is keeping nobody warm. I'm just here because it's cute.
Right. And that's, I think it's also weird for some place like Oklahoma, like, because it does get very cold, but the time that you need in Oklahoma, you're not going to spend necessarily $300 on like a down coat like you would in someplace like Chicago or Boston or something.
Sure, but also, well, you find yourself in an interesting situation living there now, but as we journey to the East Coast every Christmas, we have to drop that money to buy a good coat because East Coast winters are also not for the faint of heart.
Right. I did last season. I bought a great down North Face coat on Poshmark, but I will say it's not like the cutest. And so when I'm out doing a winter activity, especially now, I actually was talking to my boyfriend about this weekend. I think it's going to be really rough during COVID because now it's nice. We can go eat outside and walking around outside is okay. But in the winter, I'm not even going to need any winter fashion this season. Like, I'm just going to be staying inside watching movies until March. We'll see how things pan out. But you know what I mean? Like, winter fashion is so strange in that way.
Yeah, let us all mentally prepare for winter in the queue.
Well, on that frigid note, should we get into some hot art news? I think
Yeah, some
hot off the press.
Hot off the press. Love it.
That'll keep me warm and toasty this winter.
Some piping hot art news. Oh my goodness. No, but in all seriousness, we have some pretty important art news today, if I do say so myself.
Seriously, it is really hot.
Oh my God. Coming from an activist social media account called Change the Museum. They are calling for a museum boycott in the United States for the month of October. So this collective stipulates that until every institution publicly announces that frontline workers will be provided hazard pay and benefits for their labor until a COVID-19 vaccine is available, the museum going public should refrain from providing these democratic institutions the admission dollars they so desperately crave. Ooh, it's very loaded language. But this is, some pretty big news. So the boycott is also intended to pressure institutions into developing and announcing comprehensive and meaningful diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion or deal plans that address ongoing issues of racism and inequality within the museum field. So other Instagram accounts that have popped up to join this cause, such as, there's been a Better Guggenheim and the art activist collective, the Guerrilla Girls, who we, mention all the time,
Right.
has also supported the initiative that sheds light on the reality that museums across the country who are reopening do so depending on the essential frontline workers.
Mm-hmm. I first heard about this on the Guerrilla Girls, but I started following the account A Better Guggenheim, and it's pretty rough to read the anonymous submissions to that account.
I think what I have found really interesting and just following this movement as of now is just the amount of information we're getting from people a part of the initiative, and mostly the actual museum frontline workers who are commenting on social media about how they feel about it.
Right.
So it's important to address that, recent museum boycotts and putting this public pressure on museums in order to spark change has definitely worked, and very recently. So for example, the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit recently ousted its executive director, and then they rehired one of its lead curators and is working to make changes to increase the diversity of the museum's board so that a third of the board will reflect economically and racially diverse communities. And this was in effect after dozens of employees addressed a toxic work environment there. Mm-hmm. But there have also been a lot of frontline museum workers who are skeptical of this boycott, calling it only performative activism, as it appears the Change the Museum boycott hasn't received much traction. But also I'd like to point out that it was announced in late September and at this point has only been enacted for 6 days.
Yeah.
And other frontline workers are commenting on Instagram that they are fearful of this boycott because museums will not hesitate to let go of their workers if they don't have the funds to pay them. And that they say writing letters and just calling your museum is a better way of using your activism. So this is a really complicated situation because the fears, concerns, and skepticism from museum employees are all extremely valid. Mm-hmm. But we also have other employees on the other side of the spectrum that agree with the overall mission of the boycott and have seen the impact for the better. So either way, the consensus is the same, that better workplace standards and practices need to be set in place. It's just about how we are getting about that is what we differ on. So after reading all these really crucial opinions from museum workers, the situation is just so horribly ironic as people are asking you to be a patron of institutions with admittedly problematic executives because they rely on these jobs so heavily in the pandemic. And also we're talking about specifically frontline workers who are people of color as well.
Right.
So what is a patron to do? Because we need to listen to the voices of these workers, but we also need to acknowledge the collective impact that partaking in this boycott can make. Mm-hmm. Some of these actions are going to seem very contradictory, as you need to ask yourself, and as I have asked myself, okay, so if I write a letter, but also buy an admission ticket, do my actions just cancel each other out? What will be the effects of my boycott, of my patronage to museums, etc., etc.?
Right.
And all in all, even with these considerations, perhaps, as a person who believes that museums can be better and has been a museum worker myself and acknowledges that a change needs to happen, I don't think that staying silent is a good option.
Right.
But also, each patron's situation is very different, also based on how they've already been interacting with museums during this pandemic. If you're wondering how you can help this continuous effort in making museums better, safer, and inclusive institutions in your area, other than sustaining from purchasing admission, the best way is to use your voice, contact your local museums, write a letter, make a phone call. But if you are a museum member, please note that your opinion and your money carries greater weight than the average museum goer. So please, please, please use your platform in a way that at the end of the day, I think best reflects your allyship.
Yeah, yeah. I so believe, because I love this field. I mean, clearly I chose to work in a field that I know I'm not going to make that much money, right? Like, I am very aware of the lifestyle that frontline and bottom line, quote unquote, museum workers have. And it's hard because, we go into this line of work because we care about it and we see social change and the power of art, And at the same time, I think the part of the problem is, people like us are in tune with that. But if I didn't follow someone like the Guerrilla Girls, if I was just a person who just liked to go to museums for whatever that may be, and especially during the pandemic, museums that are slowly opening up are giving back to their community in a way that gives them an activity to do that's somewhat safe, right? So I think the problem with the boycott is your average museum attendee is not going to be aware that this is happening. They go and they see the art on the walls. They don't necessarily go for the conversation with your gallery guard. They don't know that there is security staff there 24/7 who isn't getting a break in between shifts. Like, that's the problem. And that's where using your voice, if you are involved in the art world, if you're listening to this podcast, if you're someone who likes to attend museums, be aware of all the different people who work behind the scenes in a museum, in a gallery. There's so much work that goes into maintaining what you see on the walls, and that matters.
I also think as well, you may be a person who frequents a museum that might be a nonprofit. So I think to this, boycott is excluding from the conversation museum institutions that are nonprofit. So, you could also make a donation to that nonprofit institution. And, there's always ways, there's always a way for you to have your voice heard. And in the museum world, like I said, especially if you're a member, money is a part of that. So I do understand the backing behind the boycott. But I think the situation overall is just so complex.
It is, because like you said, there's a ton of different types of museums. Like the way that the Guggenheim functions as an institution in this country, in the art world internationally, is very different from the museum that I work at. I mean, where I'm working, our team is working so hard to engage people virtually because we're not open to the public. So it would be hard. It seems contradictory on my part as a museum worker to engage in a boycott. That's where I work, and I think we're doing great things, bringing a lot of great conversation to the community right now. But it's very, in some ways, it's very different from the situation at the Guggenheim. But you do, I mean, with any museum, with anything, you do have a board. Like, you do have those people that are kind of behind the scenes that you may never know, you may never see in the museum, right?
Yeah.
It's all super interesting. But I think, Gianna, like you said, being aware, raising your voice is such a good thing you can easily do.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, look for that institution that's the heart of your community. Try to reach out to people who are a part of that. Try to reach out to the institution and just try to think more critically about how your museum is functioning within your community. And then make the best decision that you feel like can impact your community for the better.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Bianca, I am very excited to talk about today's episode. It's something we've been discussing really ever since we started thinking about the podcast. So, want to get us started?
Wow. Whew, I'm getting a little heated over here because today's Artpop Talk is going to be a watermelon sugar high, watermelon sugar high, because we are talking about the visual history of fruit. We are going to look at some art historical examples of how fruit has been used to display sexuality, gender, human bodies, decay, and then to complete this discussion, we are going to compare it to the Harry Styles 2020 music video for Watermelon Sugar. So, Gianna, I mean, I can't talk about fruit if I don't know what your favorite fruit is, though.
Well, I have to say watermelon has been a very iconic fruit ever since Dirty Dancing, and it continues its popularity. I carried a watermelon? I don't know what I would say to Patrick Swayze either. So, girl, I
would tell him I carried a watermelon. I'll tell you that.
So if I had to choose, I would probably say cantaloupe or blueberries. We were laughing about this earlier this summer because Mom came home with a bunch of cantaloupe, and I was talking about how much I loved it. And I feel like the consensus was that cantaloupe sucks, and I disagree.
It doesn't suck. It doesn't suck, but I just think out of the melons, for me, it goes watermelon, cantaloupe, honeydew.
And this is where
nobody likes honeydew. Who likes honeydew?
I don't fucking know. It's like, it's also really hard. Like, it's a really hard melon.
And it has like no flavor. And you know what I hate? When you get a little fruit cup and it's all fucking honeydew, as if there's no other goddamn fruit to put in my fruit cup.
For me, and this is what we talked about earlier this summer, was that it's a texture thing where you like the watermelon more and I like the cantaloupe texture more.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you want to give us some background on, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Want to give us some background on fruit?
I would love to. As we start thinking about this, what comes to mind when we think about fruit? Is it nourishment? Is it sustainability? Is it sweetness? Is it juice? Is it nature? Is it agriculture? Is it emojis? Is it religion? Is it Eve? Is it sexuality? There are so many different things that come into play whenever we talk about fruit. So why does fruit have so many different connotations for us today? And where has our visual cultures played a role in that categorization of fruit visually? What we're going to look at today primarily comes from the Western canon. I want to be clear about that. So within that, the practice of depicting food, feasting, and fruits stretches back through ancient Greece and Rome, where banquets and bacchanals were consuming passions celebrated in literature, painting, and mosaics. You know, maybe the best fruit is actually a grape, thinking about the bacchanal, unless you want to just go for general fruit wine, like Miss Moira Rose would.
But if you like fruit wine as much as I do.
So in the 15th century, artists took increasing inspiration from the culture of antiquity and from the natural world and began to depict objects such as fruit, sweets, wine vessels in both devotional and secular images. These items allowed the artists to display skills of observation and description of color, shape, and texture, but they also often carried a symbolic meaning or an allusion to the painting's subject. Early religious writings of the Middle Ages and Renaissance are also rich in this imagery, which often borrow from quote unquote pagan symbolism. For example, let's look at the pomegranate. I also wanted to start with the pomegranate because we talked about it a little bit with reference to Lady Gaga's 911 music video. This fruit is depicted in mythology, mythological paintings. It's in the story of Persephone and Hades. It is attributed to Venus as a symbol of desire or fertility because of its many seeds. However, it also appears in some images of the Virgin and Child.
So, the most recognizable and perhaps the most widely used fruit is the apple, because the Latin word for apple and evil are the same, malum. The apple was associated with the tree of knowledge from which Eve ate the forbidden fruit, probably heard this before, yada yada, causing the downfall of man. So,
LOL.
LOL.
As if.
As if. So, interestingly enough, we see the significance of the apple in early forms of literature or myths, such as in the Odyssey or in Norse mythology, because I guess the Norse gods actually get their everlasting life from the apple. One place where the apple does not appear is actually in the Old Testament's book of Genesis. And so this was, I don't know, a fun little research project for me. So the original story of Adam and Eve, the snake and the forbidden tree, of the knowledge of good and evil, mentions only an unspecified fruit, thus opening up centuries of debate. So this could have been a fig or an apple or actually a pomegranate.
A pomegranate, right? Yeah.
So starting in the 12th century, due to the visual arts, we start to see the fruit being represented in Western Europe as an apple or a fig. And then starting in the 16th century, for example, we have the Sistine Chapel. And then, the rest was pretty much an apple for the win after that.
I love apples.
Yeah.
I like gala apples a lot. I think that's an underrepresented apple.
Here for the apple. Noted.
Here for it. Here for Eve.
Yeah, good for her, honestly.
Yeah, truly.
You do you, babe.
So when I think about fruit and art, I tend to gravitate more towards Renaissance paintings, which is really interesting in thinking about something like Eve, because it's just so prevalent, even though in the Renaissance we see fruit interpreted in such different ways. So I keep thinking specifically about Giuseppe Arcimboldo, who was an Italian painter best known for creating imaginative portrait heads made entirely of objects such as fruit, vegetables, flowers, fish, and books. Arcimboldo actually worked as a traditional court painter for 3 Holy Roman emperors in Vienna and Prague throughout the later half of the 1500s. Arcimboldo remained with the Habsburg family until 1587 and continued to paint for them after his return to Italy. So although Arcimboldo was trained under traditional Renaissance ideals in art, the Habsburg court for which he worked often encouraged this kind of painting with natural curiosities and different forms of intellect within the visual arts. One of the first known composite heads were presented to Maximilian on New Year's Day in 1569. This set of paintings was called the Four Seasons. So the allegorical paintings are kind of peppered with these different visual puns. In the summer portrait, we see an ear of corn that acts as the ear of the human figure, as well as different kind of references to the court and the Habsburgs. These paintings were meant to amuse, but they absolutely also symbolized, I'm going to use a quote from Thomas DaCosta Kaufman, who's an art history professor at Princeton. He says, "The majesty of the ruler, the capaciousness of creation, and the power of the ruling family over everything else." So that's really at the heart of these composite figures. He says, in some ways, it's just humor, but the humor revolves itself in a serious way. Now, the artist was working at the time when disciplines such as biology and zoology were kind of just forming in these intellectual or academic spheres. This is kind of seen with, of course, someone like Leonardo da Vinci, who was Arcimboldo's predecessor, who was working in Milan, who pursued looking at the natural sciences within the visual arts. So Arcimboldo's composites suggest a scientific fluency that kind of highlighted the learnedness of his patrons. A quote from Lucia Tomasi, an art historian at the University of Pisa, says, "Every plant, every grass, every flower is recognizable from a scientific point of view." That's not a joke, it's knowledge. So the Habsburgs were in fact interested in this collection of nature, also this knowledge and understanding of the natural world. Arcimboldo's composites incorporated different kinds of exotic specimens, such as corn and eggplant, quote unquote exotic, right? Pretty normal for us now, which sophisticated viewers would recognize as rare cultivars from the New World and beyond. This is also symbolic of European rulers hoping to, quote unquote, extend their influence, if you will.
Arcimboldo's Four Seasons series is also just really important, looking at the whole picture of art, because we have the first really revered depiction of abstracting the human form, but also through realism and naturalism, and also having it be accepted, especially in, a high elevated high court situation.
Right.
Didn't we see one of his pieces in Vienna?
We might have. There's actually one of his pieces in the United States. So one of his composite images is at the National Gallery, I believe. The Four Seasons, I believe, is at the Louvre. Or there's a series of 6 that are featured at the Louvre. But what's really interesting is, I think when you talk with people about Renaissance art, or when you see one of Arcimboldo's composite images, you wouldn't necessarily recognize that or think of that as being something that's typical of the Renaissance, which is really interesting. It doesn't necessarily allude to any religion or Christian stories, but it's really fascinating to think about the extent to which something like the Habsburg court could recognize. They were recognizing the different types of fruit as an extension of power from the rulers of the time, and how fruit and something like an eggplant is translated in that way. Because now we think of an eggplant as being representative of something very different, right? I mean, these visual puns, like the ear of corn, that's translated to a human form, right? Like the ear of corn, we call it that. And then Arcimboldo is using that as an ear in the portrait. So we have these two kind of, for me, competing ideas, like a very contemporary idea of what fruit means in relation to the human form, and then how Arcimboldo is using it as well.
Right, to show the consumption of wealth and knowledge and power and the ability to grow and have and collect all these fruits and veggies.
Right, where I think of it as being very, almost dissected, right? So you have like when I think about fruit in the body, I think about descriptors like the meat of the fruit or the skin of the fruit or how it's plump. I don't think about Habsburg rule because there's an eggplant in it. It's super interesting.
Yeah. And such a weird one, but it's one of those little weird important Easter egg. It's in art, oh yeah, the portrait's made out of elements and fruit, and there's also the one with all the fishes.
Yeah, right. I know.
I love weird art.
But I do think that Arcimboldo is getting a lot more attention, which is cool. Because we definitely talked about him in my Italian Renaissance class. but it's not, if I didn't know anything about it, I wouldn't recognize it as Italian Renaissance.
Yeah.
So the next thing that I want to briefly touch on is some still life paintings, because fruit is so prominent in still lives. By the 17th century, still life painting flourished as an independent genre, particularly in the Netherlands, Italy, and Spain. Still life paintings have historically been dismissed by critics as merely an academic exercise in composition, color, texture, of interest purely for its decorative qualities. I think we kind of see that with Impressionism, like someone like Cezanne is really looking at color with fruit, but obviously that comes a little bit later. During this time, that hierarchy in the academic arts really favored history, portrait, and genre painting as being the most valuable styles, followed by landscapes and animal painting, and then still lives, the decorative quote unquote arts, placed at the bottom. Let us not forget that this is also gendered. So still life paintings were one of the only types of art available to women artists because it didn't involve painting and training with nudes, right? Big shocker that still lives are qualified as decorative. LOL.
Ha, ha, ha.
But still life paintings are actually super fascinating, and I tend to like them more over something like landscape paintings. I actually really hate landscapes. I think they're so boring. I don't know about you, Gianna, but I would definitely prefer a nice still life.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like, I get it. Like, I get, like, it's all important, but, like, my God, I don't know.
Truly. So fruit, vegetable, and meal still lives were often actually filled with a lot of religious symbolism. My favorite example of this, actually, sorry, does not come from a woman artist, but it comes from Dutch painter Peter Aertsen, who featured biblical motifs in his market and kitchen scenes as a warning against excessive consumption. So with Aertsen, he's kind of flipping the traditional means of viewing religious stories so that, i.e., Christian, this Christian narrative is placed in the background, while contemporary still lives are placed in the foreground. This is perceived by some art historians to, quote, comment on the arduous nature of spirituality. Those who seek enlightenment must look hard and turn their attention away from things of this world. Aertsen's most famous piece may be his meat stall from 1551. I'm sure most people familiar with something like a Renaissance class would have seen his meat scene, which actually displays the story of the flight from Egypt in the background. However, his market scene from 1569 actually doesn't seem to display a religious narrative in the background, but instead uses fruits and vegetables to allude to sexual desires and lust. There's a woman looking quite flirtatiously, I think, at the viewer as she holds a head of cabbage, and cabbage can represent female sexuality, while a man behind her holds a very conveniently placed carrot. Now,
That's amazing. Never
so
in my
this-
life my cabbage reflects my sexuality.
Yeah, right. Well, it's kind of interesting to think about like cabbage as something that's a floral shape. I think
Yeah.
flowers have that connotation of female sexuality, how a cabbage opens up and kind of flowers in that way.
Yeah.
But this piece is super interesting. I mean, there's a bunch of grapes and melons and tomatoes all in the foreground of the painting. And with the woman's look, I mean, it's so clearly, and in comparison with Aertsen's larger body of work too, represents, the fruit represents human figures and desire. Also within this kind of field of still lives in Dutch painting, I want to look at the tradition of vanitas paintings, which also emerged during the Dutch Renaissance. So these still lives reinvent ideas of decay and death. Symbols of death, such as skulls, kind of originally appeared on the reverse side of donor portraits. They appear in the corners of panels or diptychs as a reminder of the transience of existence. So this is often called a memento mori. As wealth increased amongst certain classes in Holland during the 17th century, depictions of luxury goods were often tempered by the presence of a skull or an hourglass to remind the viewer that such luxuries would be of little use to them in the afterlife. We have those examples of the skull or an hourglass that are combined with objects of fruit, different kinds of fruit, that remind us of that very human and bodily decay. What was once very youthful, ripe, and beautiful will, wither and die, basically. And it's interesting to see this kind of ripe fruit that feels very lively kind of draped over a skull or next to the hourglass. It's so contrasting, and it does take on that morbid still life. I think sometimes we think of still lives as being very, very beautiful, very lively, often with flowers, but the fruit becomes that reminder of the cycle of life, right? It's very natural. Once again, fruit does take on the body, not necessarily sexually. It doesn't remind you of sexuality, and a skull is not gendered, right? The skull could be from anyone, and these different kinds of fruit just represent the body as a whole and a symbol of the span of life.
Yeah, it's interesting if you have ever taken a painting class, an oil class, or a watercolor class. You'll have a still life set up, and your professor is going to challenge you to create some kind of symbolism or some metaphor within your still life. And it was interesting kind of going through that, formal training, if that's what we want to call it. And when we looked at examples of other still lifes to give us inspiration before we moved in and how to think more critically about these, visual artworks, it always ended up being explained to me, or the examples that my professors chose, there was a lot of memento mori in there, but it was also referred back to, the Christian religion, which I always thought was interesting, because we know that that's definitely a part of it, and these reminders of death are linked to Western religion. But I think also still lifes can be so much more than that as well. And it's just the way we choose to focus on what parts of art history and what symbolisms we want to point out, and therefore what examples we use when we teach our up and coming contemporary artists about the importance of still lives.
Right. Because death is not Western. Death is universal, and it's weird. I mean, art history in this country, of course, is probably going to be taught from the Western perspective, but it's interesting that the tradition of still life painting for you as a student was tied to that.
I think with that, we are going to take a little break, and when we get back, we are going to talk about the one and only Harry Styles.
Welcome back, everybody.
Hope you had a nice little break. I realized that when we were doing our intro discussion today, I left out some pretty significant things that happened this week.
Oh, what?
Well, we had the iconic Jim Carrey as Joe Biden on SNL making his debut.
Jenna, you're right. It was very iconic. I have to say, I was prepared not to enjoy Jim Carrey as Joe Biden.
It was like scary to me how perfect he did it. So spot on. And the finger guns killed me.
Yeah. I like actually Jason Sudeikis as Joe Biden. I didn't love Woody Harrelson as Joe Biden.
I didn't either. His teeth were like way too white.
They were way. I know that was like part of the thing, but like it freaked
scared
me.
me. I will say that if don't want to jinx anything, if Joe does become the next president, I would be fine.
No, he will.
With
He has
having
to.
this actor take that spot of the presidential actor on SNL. There are just a couple movies that me and Bianca really like that happen to have Jim Carrey in them. And like one is The Mask. So we might refer to The Mask quite often. And Bianca,
Yeah.
I actually watched that movie with Mom not too long ago. But the other random ass Jim Carrey movie that we love is A Series of Unfortunate Events, which is just so dumb. Like I never read the books. Did you?
I think I read like the first 4 or something.
I think
like
I used
that.
to like check them out from the school library and pretend like I read them, but I didn't. So there is this part, there's literally only one part of that movie that is worth watching, and he acts like a dinosaur.
When dinosaurs roll in the air.
Oh my god, it's just so funny, you guys, and that memory just like lives rent-free in my mind all the time. So when we had the SNL opener and Jim Carrey / Joe Biden acting like a freaking like weird ass dinosaur animal cat thing, like when Alec
Well, he has
Baldwin
the laser
pointed the laser at him, I freaking lost it.
It was so good.
Speaking of dinosaurs, how is Ollivander?
Oh, he's a little bread loaf.
Little
right
bread
now.
loaf?
Little bread loaf. Yeah.
He's either in a bread loaf mood or like a velociraptor mood.
Very, very astute observation, Gianna. That is the 2 moods that Mr. Ollivander has. He's either a precious little loaf who just needs love and cuddles, or he actually transforms into a real velociraptor. Like, it's almost scary how much he looks like a dinosaur whenever he's going wild.
Okay, so now that we have another boy of APT that has joined the brand, I think it's also
Oh, God. Oh, God.
I think it's also important to know that Andrew has a cat named Adam.
We were talking about Eve, so I guess it makes sense to bring up. Oh my God.
It's so funny.
He's
And
gonna listen to this and not understand why we're laughing.
it's just so funny. It is a really cute cat, but to put things in perspective, it's a hairless cat. And I just like, why I think in my head, like you and Andrew make sense to me is because you both gave your cat like people names.
Well, I
don't
mean, they
know.
were because so. Oh my God, this is ridiculous talking about his cat.
I think it's good content, but whatever.
Because Adam is a naked cat, they named it Adam. like Adam and Eve. But they don't have Eve. No. I'll get him to send me some photos. We can post it on Instagram with their permission.
Oh my god, it's just so funny. Like, I get it, but also like,
Adam, he's very cute.
he is. Oh, that's my cat. Adam. Oh my god.
Oh my God.
It's so funny.
I feel uncomfortable talking about this cat. Well, is it time?
It's time.
Tis time. If we're all ready, here. Ollivander seems good to go. We are going to now jump back into some fruit and talk about Harry Styles' video dedicated to touching watermelon sugar.
Hi.
So, hi.
Hi.
So to give some background, I need you guys to know that I could not bring myself to watch this video until preparing for today's episode. So Gianna and I had been planning the fruit episode for a long time, and I knew the day would come, but it was also going to be too much for me to watch until the right time. Right before I started working on this episode outline, I finally watched the video. And as I watched it, I don't know how to describe. My heart was beating so fast. I was blushing at my computer screen. I never wanted to be a watermelon so badly, and I felt very upset that I was not a watermelon.
Yeah.
And I just feel as though there's Bianca before she watched this music video, and there's Bianca after. I'm a changed woman.
Yeah. For the better, I think.
Gianna, also I want to hear your initial reaction because I know you were also waiting to watch the video.
Yes, I waited to watch the video. It more just when the music video dropped, like I just saw like the tidbits of it on TikTok and social media and was just like, nope, I'm not like mentally prepared to be able to do that right now. So we were talking about doing the fruit episode like forever, and then I would ask you, well, have you watched the music video yet? No. Have you? No. And I truthfully did all this kind of research about fruit and just what I've heard from the song, and then watching the video was probably like one of the last things that I did to actually prepare for the analysis, because same, like the thirst is real, and
Oh, yeah.
and that's all there's to say about that. But my to actually give you guys something to think about, my initial reaction tied to the conversation we had a couple weeks ago about the visual struggles we see between repressed sexual bodies and exploitive sexual bodies. But we don't just see these connections in art, right? Because they are embedded in our everyday realities, and we absorb and listen to words and lyrics about how one should look and behave as a person who is deemed by our society to be deserving of our sexualization. Whether we are always cognizant of the language we are being exposed to, we subconsciously start to form problematic, potentially problematic understandings of what we think is normal, especially in relation to sex. So
Potentially problematic.
potentially problematic. Oh God, let us never do a British accent again. Fuck J.K. Rowling. So you are potentially problematic, J.K. Rowling.
Truly.
As I just found myself analyzing a song talking about sexual bodies and a sexual experience, thinking both in the larger context of music, where we have the perpetuation of rape culture, which in itself just includes the dominance over and aggression towards predominantly women. And also comparatively to how other artists such as Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion are currently, working to reclaim the sexual narrative towards women within their genre of music. I just couldn't help think of the reclamation of it all.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought in many ways through the lyrics and visuals of Watermelon Sugar, even though the narrative is told to us through Harry's lens, it proved to give sexual agency back to women through a male's perspective and platform, which when you think about it is really powerful, especially when talking about sex explicitly and exclusively through both lyrics and visuals.
Right.
So the song has layers, because when, only listening to it, we are only given insight into this one heterosexual narrative. But through the music video, there were other sexual scenarios in which Harry lent his platform of sorts to women and other people so they can enjoy some watermelon sugar as well.
Yeah.
This leads me to kind of my final reaction as, a person and an artist who works around the idea of consumed bodies, is I could not ignore the agency of it all to show women of multiple colors and other bodies, literally consuming their own bodies and other bodies and having control over their sexuality.
Right. In thinking about that, when the video came out, there was all this talk about how the models were sharing their experiences of being on set and how they called Harry Styles basically the king of consent.
Yeah.
And he was not only asking all the video participants if he could touch them, but promoted a very comfortable working environment for a song that's basically about eating pussy. I mean, like...
There is no basically. Like, that is what it is about.
Right. When I also watched this music video, Gianna, it's interesting that you were kind of talking about your perspective as an artist, how you think about bodies and interact with bodies. But when I watched this, I was definitely thinking about that visual tradition of art history. And for some reason, I couldn't get out of my head that I wanted to compare it to one of the most potentially problematic examples of fruit and sexuality, which is Paul Gauguin's Two Tahitian Women from 1899. I'm going to read the caption of this piece that is on the Met's website. Quote, "Here he, Gauguin, channeled classicizing nudes."
All right.
Just cut there. Relying on sculpturally modeled forms, gesture, and facial expression to evoke the ideal of quote unquote the Tahitian Eve. Conjured in his writings, quote, very subtle, very knowing in her naivete, and enviably capable of walking around naked without shame. Whispering confidences, offering exotic blossoms or forbidden fruit, the women inhabit a tropical Eden of Gauguin's invention, in which his artistic vision, the male gaze, holds sway.
Oh my, give me a fucking break.
I am quite disappointed and put off by this description by the Met.
Here's the thing. And the thing is,
I know that some of it is quoting Gauguin's writings, but
sure, but even them making saying the women inhabit tropical Eden of Gauguin's invention. I get it, but even them using the descriptor of Eve towards Polynesian women, I don't know. It's just there's something extremely uncomfortable. There's always something extremely uncomfortable about his body of work,
right.
But I think the way that we even write about it and talk about it is I don't know. I can't stand him.
Right. So before Gianna goes into a little background on Gauguin, if you're not familiar with him, just as a description of the painting, we see two women, both of them topless. One of them kind of has an off-the-shoulder garb of sorts that allows us to see one of her breasts. So one woman is holding these kind of blossoms, these flowers, and then the other woman is holding a bowl of fruit right below her breast. First of all, no woman on the face of the planet is going to hold a bowl of fruit right under her breast like that. That's just not comfortable. So that's just...
Speaking as a third party...
with no particular interest in the matter, I'm not sure that a woman would hold a bowl of fruit like that.
Speaking
So
from experience, no.
This is how I don't carry my watermelon, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Gauguin was a French post-impressionist artist who lived for the later half of his life in French Polynesia for something like 10 something years, and is known for his use of color, or
That's about all you need to know.
as I like to point out, problematic and exoticized representation of Polynesian women who exist in our fascination within his paintings.
Married 12-year-olds, not a good guy.
So visually, as Bianca said, we have two women from the island of Tahiti, one holding a watermelon and both semi or completely bare-chested. Per the description brought to us by the Met, not only is he using the idea of primitivism in his own language and in the painting, but he also idealizes their faces to fit the Western idea of the ideal beauty and religion by also comparing them to Eve, who ate the forbidden fruit. But in this case, we have the woman holding the fruit and engaging with us through direct eye contact as if she is aware of our gaze, waiting for us to take a piece out of the cut up watermelon that is waiting on a platter for us. In the Watermelon Sugar video, at the end of the song, there is that scene where the group is featured together, looking right into the camera and gathered together almost like they're taking a group picture with their own piece or chunk of watermelon in hand. And instead of holding it outstretched to us, they take a bite out of their own fruit.
Yeah, I think that's what's so great about Harry Styles' video, using fruit still as an object to convey sexuality. But like you said, Gianna, every person in the video has a piece of fruit or is sharing their fruit in a very communal manner, which sounds, I don't think it sounds that weird, and even though the video is about sex, but it is about sex positivity and it is about asking for consent. And I think with the Gauguin piece, this piece that's seen through the male gaze, and it's like nothing about this painting makes me feel like anyone has asked for permission. That's very uncomfortable as a viewer. But in Harry Styles' video, I'd say it's more explicit. It's very direct, especially when you cut to scenes where women are kind of holding the watermelon in between their legs, and we see the actual melon kind of between or on women's bodies, and it doesn't feel harmful in the music video at all, whereas the Gauguin piece does, even though it may be less explicit to some viewers.
Right. So even though in its entirety there is nothing subtle about the song or the video, the way that it was ended is a final subtle way of telling every person and everybody in the narrative know that they have ownership over their own bodies.
Yeah, right. Exactly. The Harry Styles video, and at the beginning, the text reads before it cuts to the image of Harry Styles. It says this video is dedicated to touching, right? So I think that even before you see anything that's happening in the video, you know that there's going to be touching in the music video. And then I think even that text is also a form of consent for me, right? Like, this is about touching. Are you okay with moving forward? Like, if you're not, don't watch the rest of this video.
Yeah. One contemporary visual artist that I wanted to talk about today in relationship to Watermelon Sugar is Alonza Guevara. She is a female Chilean artist now based in New York. Guevara's well-known work focuses on the intricate structures of fruit representing desire, fecundity, which is the ability to produce an abundance of offspring, and fertility, and includes, homages to other female artists such as Judy Chicago. Her current works juxtapose, tropical fruits and mostly female nudes to represent life cycles, the connections between humankind, nature, spiritual themes, all while blurring the lines between fantasy and reality. Which, when you think about that in itself, those are also some of the constructs that hold still lives together as well. Similarly to the use of fruit and watermelon sugar, fruit in Guevara's work is used to talk about desire and satisfaction. She says the fruits can be reminiscent of a woman's womb, but they are round little containers of life. The vegetables and fruits depicted in the paintings are sometimes fresh and juicy and other times smushed and rotten, making fertility and life coexist in a parallel with decay and death, the full cycle of life. So in her ceremony series, she explores the relationship between a person and his or her environment as a means of embracing a connection with the beauty of nature that has seemingly weakened with the growing reliance on industry and technology. In each portrait, mainly of women, she actually sets up her image, asking the person to model for her, and makes this fantastic display of fruits and veggies around the body and seems to radiate from the center and the body around her or him. Similar to Arcimboldo, we have a play and twist on traditional portraits and still lifes, but here used to offer personal understandings and appreciation of beauty, desire, and natural bodies. The artist states, "In my ceremonies paintings, I find the people that I paint beautiful because they have natural bodies loaded with what we call, quote, imperfections that are actually just perfect. While I paint these nude bodies, I pay special attention to their stretch marks, veins, asymmetry, freckles, etc. For example, my painting Maria Jose Ceremony represents a mother with her child, and here I painted her cesarean section scar because it is a beautiful mark of which any mother should feel proud." Commenting on, a world that forms unnatural and synthetic understandings of beauty, Guevara is trying to make you feel attraction to the painting, which I found very interesting, and make you believe the truthfulness of this embellished setting, because we know that it's very fantastical in a lot of ways. Her work is so interesting because she is idealizing the body, but she's idealizing natural, realistic depictions of what she's seeing. Does that make sense?
Right.
So, she's not idealizing it in a problematic way. She's preserving these actual bodies, but she's putting them on these fantastical displays that do put them in this position. So I think also understanding the reality of the music video as an homage to touching also calls upon the viewer and listener to think about the truthful and natural sexual experiences being expressed, although embellished with the fruit and fantasy alike. So I saw some of those really similar connotations between the artists.
Yeah, something that Guevara's work brings to this concept of fruit is that fruit is also imperfect, right? And I think that our cousin Juliana works for Hungry Harvest, and there's other services like Imperfect Foods where a lot of the fruit and the foods that we buy are kind of hand selected, right? To exhibit this perfect piece of fruit. And I think that's something that you can critique in Harry Styles' video, right? Like there are different bodies, there are men, there are women, there are different colored people, but they're all very, very pretty, kind of idealized people having fun on a beach, which in some ways does actually relate to Gauguin's idealization of these two women in kind of this exoticized environment,
and
which Harry might be doing in the video a little bit.
Well, I felt that way thinking of the nostalgia that was also put into the visuals of with the way that it was filmed and the clothes that some of the models and actors were wearing, like evoking this happy-go-lucky, almost like 70s free fun day at the beach turn orgy kind of thing. So there was a sense of...
And it is very fantastical and eroticized.
So there was also that sense of, nostalgia and eroticism that is is also appropriate to critique at the same time. Is why I think
Yeah.
Lavera's work is so interesting too, because she's also idealizing the bodies in a way that is so much better, but by putting these people at the center of this almost like womb-like shape that she's creating that radiates from the body is very interesting. I followed her work for a while on Instagram. Her Instagram is great. She's very active. You should definitely give her a follow. Also, her isolated images that she does of the insides of fruit. She has one of a watermelon, and making the insides of the fruit look so flesh-like. Definitely also a direct correlation to the body and the rest of her work as well.
Thanks for talking about her today.
Oh, anytime. She's also stunning. Just to all the artists we talk about are stunning except for Gauguin.
I love that. Well, Gianna, I think that about wraps it up
I think.
on this fruity tooty episode of Artpop Talk.
Ooh, fruity tooty. I don't know if I like the word
So I like
tooty. Fruity juicy, maybe.
Well, ooh, this fruity juicy episode of Artpop Talk. Don't forget to tell your friends to listen to Artpop Talk. We're available anywhere you listen to your podcast and on YouTube. And definitely be sure to follow us across your social media. It's where we post a lot of images, a lot of resources. And you can always connect with us, email us at artpoptalk@gmail.com. And with that, Gianna, I think we'll talk to you all on Tuesday.
That sounds good to me. Bye, everyone.
Bye.